Okay, welcome back. Last time I showed you my black and white comic from 1990, Secret Wars 4, The Return of the Beyonder. Now that was a comic I made with a quill pen dipped in a bottle of ink. The next year in 1991, I started using markers, felt tip markers, and I would color with colored pencils. By 1992, I was coloring with colored markers. And that brings us to this comic series. It's called Superior 7. It's from a company called Imagine This Productions. They were based out of Cincinnati, Ohio. They just made these 5 issues here. This was their only publication. It was written by Chris Henry and Rodney Fike, and it was drawn by Dion Knuckles. Rodney Fike also did the lettering, and I believe Dion did the colors, but I'm not sure. Anyways, these were friends from high school. It took them 7 years to put together the first issue. It was released in 1991, and it was magazine-sized. So let me get these other issues out of the way. So here's the first issue. This is a very confusing read. It's not good storytelling, not good pacing. The art isn't terrific, but it's a nice start. You know what? They made it. It's a very long comic. It's 55 pages, 56 pages. And you know what? They published it back when it was hard to publish things. And they got it out there, and they kept going, and they do get better. Now, I've pieced it all together by reading the entire series and doing a lot of note-taking to try and figure out who the team is, who the characters are. They refer to characters that aren't on the page. They call characters by their regular name. Then sometimes they call them by their superhero name. They don't really make a distinction. A lot of the characters kind of have very similar looks outside of their costumes. Of course, with it being black and white, you can't tell difference between some of the costumes. Sometimes they leave the story and then come back in their costume, and you don't know it's the same character. But sometimes they call them the superhero name when they're in their civilian clothes, and the civilian name in the superhero clothes. So I was able to piece it all together. You have a team of superheroes led by a guy named Ratbane. His real name is Isaac. Then you've got a character named Sloth, whose real name is Robbo. You have the giant guy from the cover, Mass, whose real name is either Vinny or Antonio. You have a girl named Chevron, whose real name is Jessica. A guy named Battle Ram, whose real name is Alex. A guy named White Eagle. I'm sorry, a girl named White Eagle. There she is, right? No, actually, that's Chevron. White Eagle is not on the page here. Maybe that's her? Now I'm starting to get confused. But anyways, White Eagle, her real name is Rebecca. You got a guy named Blackwing, his real name is Nicholas. And then you have reserve members. So you've got Wave, whose real name is Paul. Dolphina, whose real name is Dawn. Short Stuff, whose real name is Rick. White Elf, whose real name is Twylith. And you have Metal Knight, whose real name is Kristoff. That's Blackwing's little brother. Then you have another character named Prism that they talk about, but never shows up in any of the 5 issues. So that's a lot of characters to keep track of. Those are just the good guys. Then you have basically a guy that the good guys are trying to help. His name is Starcore, but his real name is Karak. So he has 2 names, so it's a ton of names to keep track of. He's being chased by the bad guy, Overlord, and Overlord commands an army of basically aliens that look just like Overlord. They're called Slicks. Here are the Slicks on the cover. And then you have Overlord's right-hand man, this guy. His name is Time Warp. And he commands an entire army himself, which is called the Pack Force. So it's very, very confusing, but kind of cool. This helped a little bit. They kind of go through and piece it together. I didn't see that until I took most of my notes. So here's another character, Typhoon. He never actually shows up in any of the issues. I don't know who he or what he is, but I do kind of like that drawing. Reminds me of Jeff D. The drawing style. The cape, of course, looks like Cloak from Cloak and Dagger. Thump, another character that never shows up. Tox, another character that never shows up. Darkstorm, another character never shows up. So Pack Force, you know what? I could be wrong. Maybe some of Pack Force does show up. I seem to recall them showing up in later issues, and I had stopped taking notes on all the characters by then. It was just too many. So that's issue 1. There we go. December of 1991. Now we go 4 months later, April of 1992. This is when I was 18 years old. And we have issue 2, part 2 of the Star Corps saga. So here is Star Corps. So you get to see some more of these characters in color on the cover. There's the leader of the team. And we go through this pretty strange drawing style. Issue 2 doesn't really get any better than issue 1. But it is shorter, and it is comic book sized. And you do get more of the story. The art is improving a bit. They put a lot of work into this. I found the writing and pacing still quite confusing. So here is issue 2. The good thing about every issue after issue 1 is they have this what has gone before recap. Now this really clarifies what happened in the previous issue, unlike the issues themselves. When I got to the end of each issue, I was just scratching my head saying, what the heck happened in there? I have no idea. And then you read the recap and you're like, oh, well, that sounds pretty interesting. So here we go. The issue 2, it introduces another character, Jovel, which is Star Corps' brother. Turns out Jovel has been kidnapped by the Overlord, and Star Corps is trying to rescue him, and he recruits the help of the Superior 7. He looks really squatty, but apparently he's only like 5 feet tall. These characters are interesting. They have a character who's 4'9", a superhero character that's 5 feet tall, and then they have a bunch of them that are like 6'4". Really diverse heights for these superhero teams. Another interesting thing, I don't have confirmation, but I have a lot of evidence that leads me to believe this. I think the entire creative team on this comic book were African-American men. So here we've got some bios about the reserve members of the Superior 7. Now we have this ad for Imagine This Productions presents Time Extreme. This was going to be another comic that this company was going to put out by a new creative team. It never came out, though. And we have the first letters page. Now, in the letters page, you can see that everyone that wrote in basically said they found out about the coming of the Superior 7 comic from a thing called Advance Comics, which I looked up. It was a publication put out on a regular basis for a very long time that would talk about upcoming comics. I'm not familiar with that. So that's where they found out about this comic, and they were looking forward to it, and they seemed to understand the story a lot better than me and be able to make heads or tails of who the characters were and what they were doing. So at least out of the ones they published, who knows how many, but then again, I wouldn't have written a letter in because I was so confused. So we've got this back cover, all of these characters, none of them are in the comic, none of them are in any issue of the comic. I don't even know what this is. Imagine This Productions Graduating Class 1992 Part 1, so they're going to have even more. Look, like I said, these were high school friends that spent 7 years putting together the first issue. I remember that age, hanging out with Sean, creating characters. I made 100 characters in 1992, fully drawn, colored. I would get a stack of index cards, and I would just make a new character on every single one of them and color them in. So I get it. I'm sure they had big plans, and we're just going to make a whole Imagine This Productions universe. So now we come to issue 3. Now this is the issue I had in my youth. This was 3 months after issue 2, so now we're into July 1992, and in this one, the art gets, in my opinion, much better. See, I think it's drawn a lot better. Look at this. Very nice. And I must have understood the story in this and was able to keep track, because what I did was I went to the comic book store and I looked for comics published by companies other than Marvel and DC. I believe Image Comics had just started and maybe had a couple of issues out. It took a really long time for Image to get comics out after they launched. And once they got their first issues out, it took a really long time till they got their second issues out. So they weren't really a company to keep in mind when I was sending out art submissions. So I was trying to set... I love this. I think the art is tremendously better in this issue. So I went to the comic store, Record Trader 1 with Ralph, who's still there. And I looked through all his comic boxes and pulled out every comic that I could find that came from an independent company, so that I could gather addresses and characters and artwork to draw up portfolio pieces, pages and stuff, and then the addresses to send them off for consideration to hire me so I could become a comic book artist myself. And in here, see, I really think this is drawn very well. This Dion Knuckles improved greatly by this point. So now we get, so that's the end of that story, and they're long. These are long stories. These are not regular comic size things. Now we get to Time Extreme. They actually put a Time Extreme story in here, but they explain that this is the only story you're going to get for Time Extreme. It's the one in this comic, because it turns out that they said it was too expensive to publish comics, so they were not going to be able to afford to put out a second comic. So Time Extreme wasn't going to come out as its own issue, and they say, hey, other companies, if you like what you see, hire these guys, they're good. So that was it for Time Extreme. But they also say that between issues 2 and 3, they, as a crew, the Imagine This Productions crew went to their very first convention to promote this comic and sell signed copies and what have you. And so I found this. I thought at the time it was an old comic. I'm assuming, but probably not, because it has the copyright year. So it would have been it would have been a new comic. I didn't see it on the new comic rack. It was in boxes under a table where he keeps old comics. So it's kind of confusing. But I knew I also wasn't trying to grab really old comics because I didn't want to send off to defunct companies. I wanted to send it, you know, current company. So here we go, July of 1992. So let me show you what I drew. So here we go. It's a little bit too big to fit on the screen. I'll have to do something about that for the next video. But anyway, so the Superior 7. Right off the bat, did I misspell the name? Let me see here. Well, on the first issue, they just spell out 7, but I didn't have that. I had issue 3. Well, by issue 2, they had already changed it to the number 7. So I guess I was okay. Look, I even tried to draw it like the 7. I guess. I don't know. I already messed up their logo right off the bat. I also didn't color Starcore correctly. I don't know what so this is Sam Kieth influenced. This is like the covers of Marvel Comics Presents with the Wolverine stories drawn by Sam Kieth, where he always had these kind of Dr. Seussian twisty trees on the edge of a mushroom-covered cliff. Fungus and stuff. There was a nature trail in town that Sean and I would walk down with our drawing pads, and we would look at fungus and different plants and try to sketch them. So here's the cover. Now we get to page 1. Planet Sto-Vo-Kor, once known for its timeless peace, now it's ruled by the Overlord. So I'm making the story up, but I'm using the characters. I made this ship up. Sto-Vo-Kor, isn't that like the Klingon heaven? I must have just stole that right from probably Deep Space Nine at the time. And so I don't have the colors correct. You know, this character, let's see, that's Sloth. As I look at the other covers, like here's the next issue, you can see he's brown. But I didn't have a cover with him on it, so I was just looking black and white. In the comic, he's very much like Beast from the X-Men, so I just colored him blue. I made his tusks really huge too. Here we go, Engaging Cloak, another Star Trek reference. It's kind of, I don't know, it's not really good, but it's kind of neat. It's an improvement from last episode's Secret Wars 4 comic. It's an improvement. So here we go, Overlord is also colored incorrectly. So all the colors are, not all, some of the colors are going to be incorrect. I got Rat Bane's colors right. I got this is Time Warp. I got Time Warp's colors right. These are the Slicks. I colored them wrong. Not a big deal, right? Here we go. So the Superior 7 are meeting Time Warp and the Pack crew. Some neat energy effects. There's Battle Ram. This is stolen directly from a Incredible Hulk comic book cover drawn by Todd McFarlane. Kind of neat. And then the final page of this submission is a splash page, and this is quite terrible, but it does take me back to all of the drawings I made back then with so many characters all jumbled together. I did make a video once, it's here on my YouTube channel, where I told about how I used to try to make these big pictures of every type of character I could think of, all mashed together. And it was pre-internet, so I was just trying to go from memory what these characters looked like. Greatest American Hero, slim, good body, and so on. And so I had a lot of the details wrong. Battle of the Planets characters, I had a lot of them not looking accurate. I wish I still had all that art, but those were... There was a big suitcase full of that art that was destroyed in the mid-90s. Not by me, but it no longer exists, except for in my mind. So now, we come to issue 4. This is 5 months after issue 3. This would have come out after the comics that I made and sent off. Now, they do say in the letters page of issue 2, which I didn't have at the time, that they are open to accepting art submissions. This is probably why they were considering publishing that Time Extreme comic, because there were other creative teams saying, hey, you guys got a company? We put together a book. Let's put it out. So it wasn't crazy for me to send stuff to them. My stuff wasn't good. Clearly it wasn't picked up. That's okay. So here we go. This takes us to December of 1992. So this is 1 year after the first issue. They've come out with issue 4. They wanted this to be a bi-monthly book, but it's turned into a quarterly book. So it's been very hard for them to get these comics out. I think the art is still looking really good. I think the art looked a little better in the last issue. Even though it took them longer to put this one out. Maybe they're getting burnt out. Maybe they're looking in other directions. Maybe it's just my imagination. This art is still pretty good. Yeah. So disregard what I said. I do like this. Very gruesome stuff. This is what they could do in independent comics back in the day. You didn't see this kind of stuff. But these characters, they're very reminiscent of the look that you would see in X-Men comics at the time. I can't turn the page. Wow. Okay. So it's very difficult to follow the story, but you can kind of piece it together. Well, you know what? I read all 5 issues for the very first time yesterday, all from beginning to end. Prior to that, I'd only read issue 3, the one I had. So having, I guess, binge read the entire series, I had a better sense of what was going on. Plus, I took a lot of notes during it. But I couldn't imagine trying to, piece it together, reading one issue every 5 months. I'd be like, what the heck? So good. Here's another character, Backdraft, never shows up. And so here, this is very interesting. This is an ad for another comic that they want to put out, coming soon from Imagine This Productions, Freak Force. I don't know if you recall, but Erik Larsen had a comic book called Freak Force. It turns out he was advertising his upcoming Freak Force the same time they were advertising their upcoming Freak Force. This is another team that they had created years before and just had waiting in the wings. Lots of all their characters they were wanting to eventually put out, and so that was a proposed comic that they were going to put out next, Freak Force. So here's where things get interesting. Issue 5, the final issue. They say in here that they went to another convention. Now this issue, the final issue, this came out sometime in 1993. I don't know what month, but I do know it's the first half of the year. So anyways, they say they went to a convention. They don't say but where they met him, but I found out online. Anyways, they met Erik Larsen at a convention. They had a talk about their simultaneous Freak Force ads, and they worked out a deal. Here's what the deal is. Imagine This Productions would change the name of their team to Project Metaforce, and in return, they could run an ad for it in an issue of The Savage Dragon by Erik Larsen, which ran in issue 3 or 4, something like that. I can't verify that because I didn't check, but that's what I read. and then the Savage Dragon would cross over into an upcoming appearance in one of the Imagine This production company's comics. And so we go through this story. It actually does complete this full story arc. So it's nice. It doesn't leave you hanging. It wraps it up nicely, but it leaves it open for continuing adventures. So that is pretty great. But what they did was, then they said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a little bit of time off and regroup. During that time, we're going to reprint issue 1 at a regular comic size instead of that big magazine cover size. And they've got a new cover drawn for it. And it's by a different artist. It's not Dion Knuckles, but that's what's going to come out. So here we go. Here is the ad for Project Metaforce. So here, they've changed the name of Freak Force, and this is the proposed either cover for it. Probably not, because there's no room for a title. At least this is the advertisement. Anyway, so they said they're going to reprint issue 1, get regular comic size, new cover art, and then they're going to follow it with reprints of issues 2, 3, 4, and 5. And by the time 5 comes out, they will be ready with their new issue, issue 6, to start off the new story arc in September of 1993. That was the plan. Right after that, they're going to release their new title, Imagine This, ... issue 1, and it's going to feature the Superior 7 versus the Savage Dragon, Erik Larsen's character. And they also, let's see, where is it at? Special announcement. They're offering a subscription service. So now with all these big plans, you can go ahead and send them money and get a subscription service so you can get every issue they come out with and you don't miss a thing. And they've got all these big plans. But unfortunately, they never came out with anything ever again. See, what they did was they actually finished Project Metaforce issue 1. They started on issue 2, and then artist Dion Knuckles quit. A new artist, John Eboigbe, he came in, he finished that issue, and he started issue 3, and then was let go. The entire company disbanded. Everyone went their separate ways. It turns out they said it was just too expensive to publish comics. So that was it. That was the end of Imagine This Productions. None of the other comics came out. I don't know what happened to people's money that sent in for subscriptions. Were they refunded? Who knows? Savage Dragon never crossed over. That was that. Writers Chris Henry and Rodney Fike, I couldn't find evidence of them ever working in comics or the creative industry on anything else ever again. Dion Knuckles, he did about a half dozen more comics, and then he became Hasbro's art director, and he designed the Shadows of the Empire action figures for Star Wars. And then IMDb shows he went into a little bit of animation design after that, but it doesn't look like I can find any evidence of him having done anything in many years. So that is the end of the Superior 7 story.